Good evening. Welcome to Chicago Collections Consortium's 10th anniversary program. I'm Ellen Keith, CCC Board Chair and Director of Research and Access and Chief Librarian at Chicago History Museum, which is a proud founding member of Chicago Collections. We begin our program tonight with the CCC's Land Acknowledgement Statement. Chicago Collections Consortium acknowledges and is grateful for the Native peoples who laid the foundation for the city of Chicago and for the diverse indigenous nations that reside in Chicago today. When you visit our member organizations and when you experience Chicago's outdoor spaces, we invite you to join us in offering respect and gratitude to the many indigenous peoples that reside in the Chicagoland region, as well as their ancestors. Now, as we reflect on the last 10 years of CCC, we realize our mission of preserving and sharing Chicago's history freely and openly is even more important today. I am proud to begin our program tonight with a special announcement that Chicago's Mayor Lori Lightfoot has proclaimed March 3rd, 2022, Chicago Collections Consortium Day, and we at CCC are honored to receive this recognition. Tonight's program features the release of CCC's latest digital exhibit, A Glimpse Back at Chicago's Communities and Neighborhoods, curated by Giannakopoulos, Project Archivist at Loyola University Chicago, Women in Leadership Archives, and a panel discussion entitled The City and Its Memory, moderated by Bernard Reilly in conversation with CCC members Jeremy Bucher, National Hellenic Museum, Sara Chapman, Media Burn Independent Video Archive, and Jorge Felix, Puerto Rican Arts Alliance. Before we begin our program, I would like to extend a thank you to CCC's board and all my colleagues, both current and those who engaged earlier with CCC, who have worked tirelessly in support of this organization. I also want to recognize our founders, Mary Case and David Spadafora, and the work of our member committees and task forces, and all those who have made this celebration possible. A special recognition to CCC's Anniversary Task Force, which includes Laura Bearfield, Mary Case, Carolyn Giannakopoulos, Jeannie Long, Michelle McCoy, Bernie Reilly, Alice Schreier, Molly Zemansky, and led by Marianne Ryan, Dean of University Libraries at Loyola University Chicago, who have worked hard in planning CCC's year-long celebration. The task force has been meeting and planning for some time, and we are excited to share more events and programs in the months ahead, we've got a whole year going on. I invite you to check out CCC's website for additional events. CCC is excited to partner in its newest initiative with its members, the Poetry Foundation and the Chicago Public Library Harold Washington Library Center, in launching Making History Come Alive Through Words, a poetry contest open to all Chicagoland high school students. Students are invited to browse CCC's Explore portal for inspiration in writing a poem on Chicago. We are excited to engage students in this way and look forward to sharing their work. Please share this opportunity with the high schoolers you know. Happily, we are offering cash prizes for 5 winners. The deadline is April 22nd. Chicago Collections would like to thank the Gaylord and Dorothy Donnelly Foundation for their continued support of CCC and their funding of our anniversary efforts. The support of the Donnelly Foundation, along with an anonymous donor, has made events like the one being offered tonight possible. Thank you. I will now turn the program over to curator Caroline Giannakopoulos, who will provide us with a quick peek at CCC's latest digital exhibit, A Glimpse Back at Chicago's Communities and Neighborhoods. The exhibit is drawn from member archival collections and is focused on Chicago's unique communities and neighborhoods.
Thank you, Ellen. Thank you all for joining us tonight as we introduce the 10th anniversary digital exhibit titled A Glimpse Back at Chicago Communities and Neighborhoods. I was asked by the Anniversary Task Force to create a digital exhibit to mark this special anniversary and celebrate the work and achievements of Chicago Collections through its first 10 years. The goal was to welcome all CCC member institutions to contribute, no matter the size of the organization or the focus of their collections. So we wanted to choose a theme and design that would allow any institution to find something in their collections that would fit perfectly into the exhibit. This brought us to the theme of community and the ways people create and interact with their communities. I decided to use the exhibit to highlight stories of Chicagoans building community in the many neighborhoods and suburbs where they lived, worked, and played. The exhibit is not only a celebration of Chicago's history of cooperation and unity, but the exhibit is also a celebration of the community that Chicago Collections has built by bringing together the archives, libraries, and collections of the Chicago area. We're really proud of how many of the Chicago Collections members contributed to the exhibit. I had the opportunity to correspond with so many members, and I know that everyone has been navigating many challenges and changes over the past couple of years. And so we're really grateful so many were able to participate. When we reached out to members, they took time to dig through their collections and find objects that they were excited to share. Sometimes they were objects from new collections or their favorite collections, stories that they thought should really be told. It was interesting to see all the different ideas people had and the different ways that they chose what to contribute. I hope you'll all take an opportunity to explore the exhibit after this event. Right now, I'm just going to kind of give you a walkthrough and some tips on navigating the exhibit. But when you get to explore it on your own, you'll see beautiful and fascinating photographs, posters, documents, artwork, and videos spanning Chicago's history from the Great Chicago Fire of 1871 to student protests in 2014. There are stories of community organizing and advocating for themselves, protesting injustice. There's forgotten architectural gems and entertainment venues that once drew crowds from across the city. You'll see some great videos that offer peeks into pivotal moments in Chicago's history or just daily life. So I have a few slides that show you a sneak peek of how you can navigate. This, the first one was the title page of the exhibit, and that's what you'll see first. And throughout the exhibit, you'll see these orange buttons that you can follow through. The exhibit begins with 2 lead-in pages that introduce you to the origins of the exhibit and the themes that you will see, and it offers navigation tips. You'll also start off with a couple of really fun videos that feature footage of different neighborhoods and landmarks all over Chicago. It was really fun to include these and a few other videos from Chicago Film Archives and Media Burn Archives, which is the one you're seeing here. They offer really unique views and unique pieces of history. You see at the bottom of this page are the orange buttons that have the one on the right has the title of the next page, and then the one on the left is an arrow that will take you to the previous page. You'll see these throughout the exhibit that, and they will lead you through the exhibit path so that you can see all of the different stories in the exhibit. So the exhibit does have a set path that you can follow. However, I'm going to show you other ways that you can move around the exhibit to follow your particular interests. Next slide, please. After the 2 introductory pages, you will reach the main portion of the exhibit, a page called Chicago Communities and Neighborhoods. That's what you see here. When building the exhibit, I took all of the wonderful contributions from members, created a page for each story, connected those pages to a neighborhood or geographic area, and then I organized them into regions in the Chicago area. So this page shows you the different regions that you can take the opportunity to explore. This is just a screenshot, so it's only showing you the first few regions, but in the exhibit, you'll be able to scroll down to see others, such as South Side, West Suburbs, etc. You can select whatever region interests you, or if you want to follow the path and see all of the different stories, you can just start with the first one, North Suburbs, and it will take you through all of the stories. Each page of the exhibit is designed to stand alone and tell its own unique story. So you don't have to read them in a particular order, and you can feel free to look at them in whatever order you like. Once you choose, next slide, please. Once you choose a region, you will see a collection of stories from that region. This is a look at the West Side. Again, just a peek at the first few stories. When you're on the exhibit, you'll be able to scroll down and see more. So you can select a story, and each of those story pages will have one or a few images or documents or videos from a Chicago Collections member. And there will be information that gives you, puts those items in context and gives you a little introduction to that piece of history in Chicago. So some examples here. This first one is from the School of the Art Institute's collections, and it talks about a really interesting public art project where artists worked with community organizations and created billboards that they put up all over the city, talking about issues that were important to them. The next one comes from DePaul University, and that page is going to show you a program from Fiesta del Sol, a cultural festival in Pilsen that not only celebrates culture, but also is a celebration of the community's history of organizing and advocating to make their community better. And then the third one on this page that you see has items from University of Illinois Chicago in their Full House collections. And it talks about the first playgrounds and other efforts by Jane Addams that really impacted the Near West Side and all of Chicago in the 19th century. You can go to the next slide. So I know you can't really see and read this page, but this is just an example of one of the pages that you will see. This one has an item from the collections of the National Hellenic Museum, and it talks about the history of the famous Aragon Ballroom and dance halls in Chicago. It's very interesting. So you will see at the top of each page, you will have the title of the page, and just under that will be the name of the region that you are in. And on any page, you can click that to go back to that region's page and explore more of the stories from that region. Or you can use the buttons at the bottom of the page to go on to the next page and continue the path of the exhibit. Once you reach the end of one region's path, it will take those buttons at the bottom will take you to the next region so you can continue to explore. Next slide, please. As you go through the exhibit, you will inevitably want to get a closer look at the really interesting images that you find. There will always be information and a description under each image, but you can also click the image to see a larger view of it and see all of the information about the original object and where it came from. The text that's in blue are links, and the one you see, this image is from the Puerto Rican Arts Alliance, and their page is about the Puerto Rican community in Humboldt Park. And you can see here, you can click on Puerto Rican Arts Alliance here in the photo data, and that will take you to that organization's page in Chicago Collections Explore portal. And then you'll be able to explore the other images and collections that are there in the portal and learn more about that institution's collections. All right, next slide, please. Right, no matter where you are in the exhibit, you can always use the menu in the top left corner to navigate to different pages. As you can see all of the different regions that are available to explore, and you can see all of the stories in each region so that you can select things that way and find what interests you. You can also use the magnifying glass in the top right corner, and you can put in your neighborhood or a keyword or whatever interests you, and you can hit enter on your keyboard and that will run the search, and it'll bring up different media or pages that have that keyword, and then you can find what you're looking for. Two bonus ways to see the exhibit are the pages Glimpses by Theme and the Media Gallery. You can choose those from the menu here, or if you go through the exhibit path, you'll see those pages at the very end. Next slide, please. So here you can see the Glimpses by Theme page will have this word cloud with some different themes that are present in the exhibit. You can click whichever one you like, and it'll bring up a page with the different stories that relate to that theme, and you can look at them that way. The media gallery is just what it sounds like. It's a page that has every piece of media used in the exhibit, so that if you just want to see all of the cool things that were contributed from our members, you can go to that page and see them all right there and click to see a larger view of them and get more information. All right, next slide, please. All right, I hope that information helps you navigate the exhibit, and I hope it makes you excited to see more. If you have questions, you can email me. My email is right there. Check out the About This Exhibit page in the exhibit, where you will see the many people who helped make this project happen and who supported me throughout. A big thank you to them, and thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Caroline. The Chicago Collections Consortium digital exhibits continue to be something that CCC is very proud of, as it's another opportunity for our member collections to be in conversation with each other, and invite you to take time to check out our website to view this and other CCC digital exhibits. Now I'd like to introduce Bernard Reilly, former president of the Center for Research Libraries, previously director of research and access at the Chicago History Museum, and earlier chief curator in the Library of Congress Prints and Photographs Division, and he will serve as moderator for tonight's discussion, A City and Its Memory.
Thanks, Ellen. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to The City and Its Memory, a conversation. This is something that we meaning the anniversary committee, thought about as, or developed as kind of an idea on a way to celebrate, as an appropriate way to celebrate the anniversary of the Chicago Collections Consortium. The idea of the city and its memory, the idea of the city as an archive in itself has been around for a while. The city's own monuments, the buildings, the street names, and et cetera, that are part of the city, are kind of built into the fabric of the city, are ways in which cities, particularly great cities like Chicago and Paris and New York and London, have recognized what was important about their past. It's interesting that the role of cultural institutions like the members of the Chicago Collection Consortium, the museums, the research libraries, the historical societies, the role that they've played in society to date as being the custodians or stewards of collections, cultural materials and historical materials and documentation, and even data that's important to the identity and the history of the city. So this is really what we're celebrating tonight. We're looking forward, and we've invited 3 panelists, representatives and decision makers from 3 very different kinds of institutions in Chicago: the National Hellenic Museum, the Media Burn Independent Video Archive, and the Puerto Rican Arts Alliance, to talk a little bit about to engage in a conversation with us about where this is all heading in an age of social media, in an age of digital communications, and in an age, and frankly, where memory is at least to a certain extent at risk or in danger of suppression. We've seen the ways that autocratic societies around the world suppress their histories, whether those histories be of what happened at Tiananmen Square in the late 20th century, or whether it was the outcome of what happened in post-war Europe after World War II. So I asked each of the panelists to say, to begin, I asked each of the panelists, I'm going to ask each of the panelists to talk a little bit about their institutions and themselves, give us a little bit of background. But before that, a word about format of the event. We are going to be speaking for about 45 minutes, and if there's time for questions and answers, which we think there will be, we hope there will be, we'll open it up for you people that are participating, people that have joined us tonight, to submit questions. We'll be asking you to submit them on the Q&A feature, not in the chat. The Q&A feature makes it much easier for us to monitor and to pick up those questions. So at any rate, I want to ask each of the panelists to say a little bit about their institutions and their own background, so you get a chance to know them. Jeremy Bucher, who's Collections and Archives Manager at National Hellenic Museum. Do you want to start?
Sure. Thank you, Bernie. Thank you, everyone, for joining us here tonight. As Bernie said, my name is Jeremy Bucher, and I'm the Collections and Archives Manager at the National Hellenic Museum in Chicago's Greektown neighborhood. For those of you who don't know, just real quick about the museum, NHM is dedicated to connecting generations to the legacy of Greek culture and history through the Greek story in America. The museum preserves and portrays Greek history and the Hellenic legacy through educational classes, exhibitions, programs. And at the museum, I manage and maintain the artifact collection, as well as our archival collections and our oral history collection, which is really one of the most important things we have at the museum. And it was really was the driving force for creating the museum in the first place, capturing the stories of Greek Americans before they passed on, capturing their immigrant experience so that we can share that with future generations. And during this long pandemic, of which we've all been involved, I have started doing digital exhibits at the museum for the first time in the museum's history. And also outside of the museum, I am a board member at the Chicago Cultural Alliance. And I just wanted to quick highlight two of our very important core member institutions, the Ukrainian National Museum and the Ukrainian Institute of Modern Art. I urge anyone viewing here with the means to travel and visit those institutions, to donate those institutions, to support the Ukrainian community here in Chicago that has given so much to this city, as well as their friends, families, and loved ones back in Ukraine.
Thanks, Jeremy. Next, Sara Chapman, who's Executive Director of Media Burn Independent Video Archive. Sara.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Media Burn is an archive of videotapes in Chicago. We collect and produce and distribute documentary and experimental video created by artists, activists, and community groups. And our mission is to use archival media to deepen context and encourage critical thought through social justice lens. So we were founded in 2003 by Tom Weinberg, who had a long career in independent television, video and television. And the collection has more than 8,000 videotapes with a very strong connection to Chicago, although not limited to Chicago. And I think unlike many of the more traditional archives who may be, viewing here today or participate in the collections consortium, we've always been a digital archive. That's always been the way we serve audiences. Our videos have been viewed more than 20 million times online, and that's the main way that we reach people. The collection is very, very broad, so there's something in it for everyone. But in light of this conversation, we're very, very proud at the way that our collection portrays communities all around Chicago in ways that you don't often see on the news. Just small stories, just families living their lives in normal communities all around the Northwest, South sides, East Side even, and just telling stories of ordinary life that might get forgotten, as well as cultural life, political life, sports, music, and so on. And yeah, I'm happy to talk more about this during the discussion.
Thanks, Sara. And now Jorge Felix, who's Studio Arts and Exhibition Program Manager at the Puerto Rican Arts Alliance. Jorge. You may be muted because we're not hearing you. Yeah, you're muted. There we go.
There you go. Good evening, and thank you for the invitation, and congratulations to the Chicago Collections Consortium. I've been working in the development of El Archivo Spanish for the archive since 2014, El Archivo was born out of the need to document the life and contributions of Puerto Ricans in Chicago and the Midwest. After working in a curatorial project that narrated the stories of migration of Puerto Ricans to Chicago, it was obvious to the community and to our organization that we have lost a lot of the many members that form part of the big migration of Puerto Ricans that came directly to Chicago in the 1950s. After 3 years of setting up the infrastructure, space, storage technology, and policies, we opened the archive. This is a digital archive. We focus on photography. It has been a cumbersome but rewarding project. El Archivo is a community archive. The policies were developed with the input of a community advisory committee. We made a call for donations to the community. And since then, we had community members stopping by to have their family photos evaluated for accession into our collections. Right now, we have over 1,200 images digitized. So we're in the process of accession into our system. And now with the help of the Chicago Collection Consortium, we're making them public.
Great. Thanks, Jorge.
Thank you.
Okay, so back when a number of the larger institutions that are members of the Chicago Collection Consortium were founded, the collections were tangible things, and institutions were arbiters of what was important to preserve, and also was speaking largely to a relatively local audience. Jeremy talked about with the pandemic, it forced them to rethink their audience and to really start putting more of their collections and more of their exhibitions online. And Jeremy, I wonder if you say, how much your institution these days is speaking to the Chicago community versus national or even global audiences.
Yeah, so our community had really wanted a digital presence for the museum for many years, but we didn't really have that big motivator to push us in that direction. And really, the pandemic ended up being just that. We needed to make sure that people saw that we were still here, that we were still active, though we had to close our doors, that we were still doing the work of preserving Greek American history and the Hellenic legacy in the US. And so the switch to doing digital exhibits was something that grew out of that. And we were pretty much given free rein to do so, because this was something that our organization really hadn't had much experience doing prior to this, as I had mentioned. And with that, we found that we reached just a huge new audience of people who, for whatever reason, whether it's geographic or financial, weren't able to actually come to the museum and view what we had on display there. And so a good example of that, we did an exhibit of Alexander Moore paintings. He was known, an artist who was known as a Philhellene, a lover of all things Greek, and but he was a German artist, and he painted a lot of Greek landscapes and Greek peoples. And we were never really able to display his work that we have in our collection at the museum, mostly due to logistics. But with this switch to doing a digital exhibit, we were finally able to actually show these works to the world and provide some context and history to them. And through that, actually, the painter's nephew, living in Germany, reached out to me and noticed that we didn't have any or many portraits of his work in our collection, and reached out and wanted to donate one. And actually, when he came to the United States on a trip, he donated probably my favorite work that we have in the collection to the museum. And that's something that it would not have happened 10 years ago. There was no way for that to have happened. The museum wasn't in a place to have really a digital footprint like that. And he would have never known that we even had these works in the collection. And so we've been getting a wider global audience, but also closer to home. We recently switched to collective access from Past Perfect as our collections database. And with that, we've opened our collection to anyone and everyone who has an internet connection to view what we have, as opposed to just being able to see what we have on exhibit currently in the museum. And with that, we've really been able to tap into this wealth of community knowledge about our collection, things that sometimes even we didn't know. People are able to connect to us and reach out through systems built into collective access. Any comments that they leave go directly to me as the collections manager. And with that, we've been able to really improve our collection and what we have, and especially the metadata attached to those objects. And so really, just with this digital turn, these exhibits and putting our collections online, we've just been able to reach so many more people, and it's been really good for the museum and for the community.
Thanks, Jeremy. Jorge, does this sound familiar? You're representing an institution that has a large local constituency, but also really a kind of international constituency.
Definitively, access to media and web platforms has allowed for a more fair, shared narrative of the Puerto Rican community, not only in Chicago, but within the context of the international diaspora. Something that always has been of interest to me has been how narratives change depending on the organization, the institution, how it's told, depending on the researcher. Our archive had been focusing and trying to bring a wholesome history, and web-based platforms has allowed us to have the public engage. Now it's not only the vision of one organization, the one researcher. Everybody is engaged, and everybody can debate and show images that might complement and make corrections to the narrative that we're presenting or that somebody is presenting from our collection.
Great. That's interesting. You talk about narratives, and that so it's your narratives that you're presenting, are they ones now that are focused more broadly on the Puerto Rican diaspora, or there's a certain relevance to people back in Puerto Rico?
Well, in our collection, we have been focusing in Chicago and the Midwest. Puerto Rican history outside of the island and the Caribbean has been known by the story of Puerto Ricans in New York. Chicago for a long time was the second city also for Puerto Ricans. And right now we are fourth, with Miami and Orlando as the second and third. But Puerto Ricans in Chicago have been really instrumental in the politics, perhaps not so much on the cultural scene, but politics, we have been at the forefront. Many people don't know that story and how Chicago had been a center for Puerto Ricans on the South, on the East, and on the West, and meeting here for organizing, for planning and engaging the broader agenda of the Puerto Rican community and the diaspora. That sense of fairness and democratization, almost, I might say, is allowed via this media platform and social media.
It's interesting how the idea of the role that the institution plays in acknowledging what's important. You know, in the past, it was always done in the way of what do we collect? So you know, what the Chicago History Museum has collected has been what Chicago History Museum curators have thought is or considered on the basis of a lot of research and study, what was considered what was important to remember, important to preserve. But it sounds like that authority is being kind of shared more broadly now. I wanted to ask Sara about that with the so-called democratization of media, the ubiquity of recording devices where everybody is carrying around a video phone or a smartphone that has video capabilities, and also the ubiquity of the social media platforms like YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. YouTube in particular, Sara, because you're a video and film organization. Has that changed the picture for your organization?
Well, our organization's roots really are in the sort of like very beginnings of that kind of opening up of media, starting in the late 1960s when portable video cameras finally became available to the public. And it meant that for the first time, sort of like not on the same level as now, but it was really the precursor to sort of like everyone being able to access technology to make their own media and to find ways to distribute it. Obviously, you know, it wasn't really until, you know, about 20 years ago that the vision that those people had in the 1970s, you know, really came to fruition, where like really literally everyone could transmit their content, you know, online. But that's, I think, the people whose work we collect and who we work with, that's always been their vision, you know, to just have everyone's voices represented and to sort of eliminate that, you know, that group up above that's sort of like choosing whose voices gets heard. Mainly they were sort of reacting to the structure of television, you know, which was very, very limited prior to cable. And so I think that in general, it's just a very, very marvelous thing that we all can communicate. And as collecting institutions, on the other hand, we're going to be facing a huge challenge in coming years of thinking about like how do we save the records of this era, given just like how plentiful they are, because it's almost the amount of content that exists is sort of more than like a human scale can even really process and think about. And to some extent, I wonder how much of this era's media and social media, and as well as like video, text, everything is really going to be saved. It'll be, I guess, interesting to see the mechanisms by which this moment do last into the future, because we think of things like Google and YouTube as sort of being these permanent archives, but they're really not. They're things that could disappear at any moment, and they're also subject to you know, controlled by others. So yeah, I think we're in a really wonderful place, and I hope we find a way to just sort through all this data in the future.
I know on the ground floor, you guys are the original citizen journalists, or the filmmakers that you work with, the original citizen journalists. So yeah, I mean, I think that it's clear to people that there's an enormous amount of content. It's really an overabundance of records and content that's out there now, but that even in the beginning, you had a lot. There was a lot of analog tape and film that you folks are still wrestling with, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's still out there. I mean, it's a major issue for media archivists that there is more video. We deal with just videotape and not film, but just videotape, which is like about 1970 to 2010, just the amount of videotape there is in the world, it is not going to be saved. You know, just like the amount that is in institutions right now, we don't have the resources to digitize it all before it's lost, because it's deteriorating very, very quickly. And more importantly, the equipment is being lost. And there isn't, once sort of like these specialized parts run out, like they're gone. Like there's someone, some archivist posted, so quad tape was sort of the television format this very big broadcast format, and there's like a finite number of quad heads. The heads are the things in the deck that like read the tape. There's like a certain number left, and there's no companies that can or do make this anymore. And sort of like there's a certain amount of hours that the heads sort of will last for, and like that's the amount of hours of quad tape that can be transferred, you know, and then that era will be done. You won't be able to just say like, oh, I just uncovered this Johnny Carson episode or something, and you know, like it'll just be done. So we are really facing a time crunch to try to preserve this media as quickly as we can. Unlike film, which is a very, very long lasting medium. Film has lasted in good conditions. It's lasted 100 years and more. Videotape, it was always a transitory medium. It was never meant to last. It was meant to just sort of be a temporary carrier. And you can't, with film, you can do a lot of physical repairs to it. And with videotape, it's just an electronic signal. And you can't see it. If you look at a piece of videotape, it's just like it's you know, there's no image there that you see, and a human can't put it back together once it deteriorates.
You can't hold it up to the light and see it like you can. Yeah, I know the Chicago History Museum has the Studs Terkel audio archive, and that's an enormous collection, and just the volume of that material is it's daunting. I mean, to handle it. With audio tape, you have sticky shed syndrome, where the tape just breaks down, even if you don't do anything with it over time. In terms of the kind of overall kind of abundance or superabundance of evidence and documentation there, I wonder, Jorge, are you seeing kind of a flood of new things that people want the organization to preserve, want the organization to take care of and steward?
You know, like Sara mentioned, we haven't even gone past the 90s. We have been focusing the migration story and the early 60s, 70s, 80s, and in our archive and the focus of the collection. At the moment that we start doing past and start dealing with digital, that's going to be another technology and another system that we'll have to add, and that will represent a challenge to the organization. Right now, we're just focusing in black and white images or color images, but they're printed documents. And right now have been so much the content, the documents and the images that have been coming through our doors. People that wants to share their story, people that wants to drop their photos to be included on the archive, that we have had to make a whole. We're a small to medium organization. We don't have the staff and the capacity to deal with that amount of images. So we are trying to focus on getting what we have digitized, collect their stories, which is a big challenge and another time-consuming area, because an image without a story is not that much helpful. So we need to go out there. A lot of the images that are coming, they're not that detailed on the story behind the document, and we have to go out there, show it. And on that, social media have been really instrumental. We have been making private groups where we invite community members, older, senior members of the community. We show them images or sharing from their home those stories and telling us who is who, the faces behind, and when that moment occurred. So it has been slowly, we are making advances, but it's something that we have to take at a pace, because if not, we will be overwhelmed.
Thanks, Jorge. Jeremy, when we spoke the other week, you talked about the history of some of these kind of accidental archives out there. You mentioned the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel and its news morgue, and how that disappeared, and how that Google had promised to keep it all up on the web, put it up on the web, and that's disappeared. You must get people that assume, you must have people, some of your constituents, some people in your communities that assume that if they put it on YouTube or if they put it on Facebook, that it's going to stick around, it's going to survive. Is that, Jeremy, you've learned from the Missouri or the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel and Google experience?
Yeah, there's a misconception floating around, and I think a lot of people believe it, that once something is digitized, that it's safe, that it's secure, that's the last you touch that digital object. And truth is, it just couldn't be further from the truth with that. Digitization, as it's not really an end goal, it's the process, a continuing process. And that is something that some folks struggle with, just that idea, because I think a lot of folks don't really understand that a digital object is still an object, and it needs the same preservation and care and effort that you'd put into maintaining a physical object. And with a lot of the technology that we have, it really is, it opens up so many doors, but in many ways it can be a double-edged sword. Our oral history collection at the museum, it was displayed on a computer kiosk. I think it was written the program was written in an outdated HTML language, and it basically just stopped working, and we had lost access to to displaying our oral histories from that computer. We still had all of the oral histories. We still had all the transcripts. Those are all stored in several places. We have the redundancies in place in case something goes wrong in one place. For instance, we have all of our oral histories uploaded to YouTube. They're on there. You're not able to view them on YouTube. We just have a special link that you can view them in the museum on that computer now. And but as Sara said, YouTube could potentially disappear, and there goes all of those oral histories. So we have them stored in several places. We have them on a hard drive. We have them on an external hard drive. We have them on an Amazon Web Services cloud, and then also in collective access. And we also recently found a Dropbox folder we didn't know that we had, that also had a lot of our oral histories also stored in there. But at the same time that this technology does, again, it can be a double-edged sword, because we lost a lot of what that display system that we had built. I was actually able to make use of some newer things to kind of create a new, with very limited tech expertise, a way to build a new display, and that's through using Omeka. That website, as well as YouTube. I basically just embed the YouTube videos into Omeka, and so when one door had closed and another one then opened, and it's a temporary measure, but it does work, and it kind of goes back to that idea of democratizing these services, as we kind of touched on before. Anyone could do this. I had very limited technical expertise when it comes to coding and programming, but I was able to actually put this together, and I think that the Omeka platform we use costs us somewhere around $35 a year, and so there's options there for community archives. Also, we use Omeka.net, which is hosted on their servers as well. So we have another space where we're keeping our all the metadata that's attached to the images and things like that, and we can pull our images off there if need be. But it really does show that community archives are definitely a viable alternative to what started this with your question, the more corporate archive that is say Google, when they buy up a bunch of newspapers from a community and then want to digitize them or have the plan to digitize them, and then something falls through and that doesn't happen, but Google still has the rights to the newspapers then, and they become inaccessible.
Sara, I wonder if in this environment where there are all these other platforms out there like Google, what's available through the Google search engine, what's available on YouTube, and that is there pressure to differentiate the memory institution like yours, an archive like yours, from those other platforms where content could be parked and exposed?
I mean, I think the difference is that with digital content, with our physical collections, you have, a bookshelf and you see all of the books that are in your room and you know that they're there, or you have a bunch of DVDs and you see the DVDs and you know that they're there. With digital content, especially once it's uploaded to the internet, it's very easy for no one to know that it exists. And it may still be on the internet, but it may be, like Jeremy said, with that Dropbox account, maybe no one in the institution, or maybe this is your personal thing, maybe no one knows that Dropbox accounts exist, or they lost the password, or they stopped paying for it. Then the content disappears. It may still be online somewhere, but like if no one knows to access it, it might as well not exist. So I think that although these bigger platforms, they're tools for us to use, but they themselves are not really going to ensure that the content is accessible in any way. Like institutions and people are still really needed, and it's much harder with the digital content, because you can't see it. You just have a hard drive and there's stuff on the hard drive, but you don't see that from looking at it. And for example, if what you have on that hard drive is video files that you made in 2003 and they're WMV files, maybe you can't play them anymore. There's so many more dependencies with digital technology, where you need software, you need hardware. Maybe the hard drive that you have, this very old hard drive, maybe you don't have just simply the cord that plugs it into your computer, or maybe your computer isn't, so there's just so many different ways that you can be fouled in trying to access older content. So I think that memory institutions are really more important than ever, because they have, professionals who understand this stuff and who are dedicated to, keeping a permanent record of things in the way that, just all of the stuff, Facebook and whoever, there's no one in charge of making sure that you can still find your family's photos from 2005. Like if the person in your family who took all those photos dies and you lose access to their account, maybe all those photos are gone forever. So yeah, I think we still have a very, very major role to play.
Is it hard making the case for that to people, or do you find that that's a challenge, making the case to people who just figure, though, if it's on the internet, I can always find it somehow?
I mean, we do face the challenge with people not necessarily understanding all the labor that goes involved in digitizing content. That when we have a videotape in our collection, someone has to take it out of a box. They have to look at it. They have to put it in the player. Maybe they have to bake it. They have to clean it. They may have to splice it. It takes, a few hours of time for each hour of content. And so some people, it's hard for them to realize that if we have something in our collection, like why it isn't available to them online immediately. Like I had I'm working with this group of grad students who are studying, they're in the School of Information at University of Michigan. And so they were reviewing the way we present content in our website. And one of them came back with the feedback that I don't understand why there's all this stuff about video preservation. That's fine, but I don't really care. And I was like, well, I mean, videos don't magically appear on the internet. Human labor goes into that. And so I think that's more the issue we face, that people don't value that sort of human labor that goes into before things can be made digital, and so that they can continue to be accessed once they're digital.
Yeah, I don't know how you answer a question, or you respond to a question like that, or that to a comment like that guy, the person from University of Michigan. You know, you just wonder. But Jorge, I want the idea of differentiating a real kind of community-based memory institution from any random platform out there that seems to be highly functional, like YouTube or Facebook, that kind of thing. Is that something that, is there ways that your organization has to establish or establishes trust and differentiates itself from the kind of the standard private or commercial platform?
You know, there are not that many. I think that the only one that we have is in Puerto Rico and on New York. El Centro is an academic institution, but those ones, the one in Puerto Rico, focus on Puerto Rican history. There is little about the diaspora. The same thing happened in New York. It's an institutional archive, and it tells the story of New Yorkers. We're intending to do the same in some way. We want to tell the story of Chicago-Ricans, but we don't have that problem of having to challenge other corporate archives. In our case, it's the same issues as Sara mentioned. It's to keep up with the technology, educating the community. Everybody send me via email a photo that they scan, and they think that we can use that. It's not that process of education and all the steps. It's really time consuming to organize, to maintain, to making copies. In our case, we have 3 hard drives. We still don't have those cloud services. And sharing publicly the information. So in our case, we're still growing, educating ourselves, and we need a lot of capacity and bring it more personal. We rely a lot on interns.
But you do have an asset, a major asset, which is the trust of the community. You're basically, that's the asset of a community-based organization, one that's accountable to the community that you serve. Is that valuable?
Oh yes, definitely. The fact that we're a digital archive, it has a lot of, enhances that trust because it's more transparent. It's a lot of people can come in and see through web platforms the images that we're sharing, that in a way are inviting people to come into our facility and being able to see and request a document, a hard copy photograph. But again, it's a process. It's really difficult, but that sense of community, that sense of value on the work that we're doing is there, and that's what motivates us, and we continue doing this. I think that also is starting to show. This last December, we got a major grant for our archive. We're going to be creating a specific collection telling the story, the LGBTQ stories of Puerto Ricans, Latinos in Chicago. So it's another area that it was lacking or not existent in our the narratives that we were collecting. So we're really glad that that's happening. And this is part of that process of trust and the community that is coming to us to drop their materials.
So they do see you as different, that you're, the metadata that you put up when you put something, an object from the collection on the web is more inherently trustworthy. That,
Meaningful.
yeah. I wonder if the issues connected with intellectual property and copyright are wound up being issues for you. I was thinking of Jeremy now and Sara for the with the media burn archive, that the web is a environment where it's much more public than, say, a reading room or a study room at a library or a historical society. So the hazards or intellectual property, the hazards of copyright, or the restrictions that might come from copyright, do they interfere? Are you having issues with that? I guess that's the question for Sara, mostly because you deal with moving image materials.
I mean, with our collection in general, the people who made these works made them because it was something they were really passionate about and they wanted people to see it. And their struggle was like how to get more people to see it, not how to prevent people from seeing it. And so in general now, 40, 50 years later, the fact that someone has gone to the trouble of rescuing it and saving it and making it available, like this is something they're thrilled about. This is something that people, almost, go to tears about how happy they are that this has happened. So while copyright and stuff affects us to some degree, I mean, it's different when you're licensing content, for a commercial thing. But in terms of providing access, I don't think there's anyone in our collection who would think it was value to have their stuff with us if it was only going to be limited to on-site viewing or limited to some kind of like password situation. Mm-hmm. They donate their collections to us because they want viewership, So I mean, there's limited instances where material maybe is personal. Sometimes we often have the camera original footage from a documentary. So when you make a documentary, you shoot, let's say 50 or 60 hours, you cut it down to an hour and a half. So there's that whole body of footage, which is incredibly value, especially as time passes, as sort of like a real time window into the past. And you can see, what the inside of spaces looked like, or how people dressed, or the way they greet each other, or just watching events unfold in real time can be really incredible. But that's one of the few areas where once in a while there's material that we do need to restrict, because you're making a documentary and you're gaining the trust of your subject, and you're ensuring them that you're going to be faithful to their goals. And most of the time, most of the documentaries in our collection are not sort of like hit pieces. They're trying to show something good about our community. And so in those instances, there can be material that just like it wasn't intended to be shown to anyone. And so those are the types of instances where we have to be cautious and understanding when we're reviewing footage. It's been a very rare thing where, someone was just later embarrassed, by, like, we had someone who was filmed for a TV program that was about like youth in different parts of Chicagoland. So there was like a North Shore kid, and then there was someone in Pilsen and someone in like Englewood. And the North Shore kid, now a 40-year-old or whatever, he felt a little embarrassed by, the things he said in 1994. And so like he just didn't want his name on it. He felt like it was part of the historical record, but like he just didn't want his name appearing in Google search, because when you Googled him, it was like this video is the #2 thing. So every single person who Googles him, they like watch this video of him when he's 13.
Yeah.
So that's the type of thing we deal with. It's like, it can be overwhelming, especially with raw footage collections, to have someone's name be in so many Google search results. If we have 30 videos with them, that can be weird for their public presentation. But in general, yes, in terms of like copyright, it's generally not much of a hindrance to us, because people want their work to be seen, and because we're presenting them, for free for everyone to see and appreciate and enjoy, and we're not, making boatloads of money off of it.
Not a commercial organization. They see the people behind the organization, the people behind the exhibitions and the website. You had talked earlier, Sara, about how much effort and actual real work goes into dealing with collections, and that's very different than what goes into hosting a social media platform or or a video service like Vimeo or YouTube, that kind of thing. I want to ask Jeremy that that whole business of the people behind the collections. I don't want to dwell too much on the issue of trust, but I think it's really important, an important way of distinguishing memory institutions from the rest of the media kind of environment out there. And Jeremy, you've got that wonderful naturalization certificate for Erasmia Theodoropoulos from 1940. That's a really kind of a personal document, and they tell us a little bit about why people share those kinds of things with the National Hellenic Museum.
Yeah, like I had mentioned earlier, our oral history program is really the driving force at the museum, and really capturing those stories of past immigration, and really showing the successes and sometimes the failures of the Greek immigrants who came here. And part of that. Part of the things that we get donated, like that naturalization certificate, really add a lot of context and, of course, content to our oral history collection. The majority of our oral histories are videos, and so people really enjoy sharing those types of documents to add into the video, as it really it's not like a bona fides kind of thing. It's more just that well-rounded story, because they want something that their descendants are going to be able to see and to view, because they may not be able to actually handle that physical object. But we, of course, are going to preserve that physical object, and then making those digital surrogates that can be viewed. It's something we get a lot of. Now that we've expanded to have our collection online, is people reaching out who, again, can't make it to the museum if they live in Los Angeles or even as close, but as far as Minnesota, they can really see their family's collection, and that's something they really enjoy doing, and that's something that, going back to that idea of trust, that our community members understand that we're doing everything in our power to present and preserve those items in the best way possible. It's going to protect their privacy, their family's privacy. One of the ways we kind of navigate that is we can change up our deed of gift forms, and add, like Sara mentioned, like add any restrictions to viewing or interacting with archival content, or our collections items. But we did have an experience a few years ago now, where we recorded an oral history with a community member, a very important community member who was very influential when it came to kind of the museum and the idea of Greek history here in Chicago. And we were very excited to capture her oral history, because we felt it was a very important story for our community to know and to remember. And it was recorded on a Friday, and by Monday morning, when we got back into the office, we had just frantic voicemail messages from this community member. And when we called her back, she felt that she came off poorly, I guess was just kind of like on reflection, she felt that way. We obviously didn't think that at all, but it was obviously something that she had a problem with. And so even though she had already signed over the deed of gift, and the release form for the video, that was one of those judgment calls we had to make, where she didn't really want this shared and she didn't want her name attached to it. We gave the opportunity to say we can restrict it for 25 years and then make it available after that, because it was such an important story, but she didn't really want anything to do with that. And so we deleted it. We deleted it off the recording device, and deleted the notes, shredded the notes for that. And so that story is lost to the community, and it's a blow to the community, but also those are the kinds of calls you have to make to maintain that trust with your community. If it's something that they don't want shared, even if you have every right to do so, you need to make the decision that's going to be best for the community in the long run, and her being a member of that community, that was the decision we made.
History can get complicated.
And that was essentially, she felt like she was bragging. She was a very accomplished person, and it was more of a cultural issue that she had experienced, how she was raised, how she was acculturated, and that, yeah, it's not something that would have happened with everyone, but it was something that was unique to her, and so we respected her wishes.
I remember you talking about materials that might be sensitive or controversial. I know Chicago History Museum, one of the things that always impressed me about Chicago History Museum was their acquisition of the Chicago Police Red Files from the police surveillance of left-wing groups back in the, I think it's 40s and 50s and 60s, which are files that are preserved forever at the Chicago History Museum, but they're not entirely open to the public. The organization put in place protocols for providing access to those materials. They'll never go completely on the web because there's so much surveillance related materials in them, but your institutions can do things like that. That's always been an important part of, I think, being a memory institution. We're going to be, in a couple of minutes, we're going to go into the question and answer period, but I wanted to ask, mention to Jorge, one of the objects that I thought was very compelling for me that you put on the in the digital collection here at the Chicago Collections Consortium was the photograph of the El Club de Bicicletas, the bicycle club in Humboldt Park in 1996. Jorge, you want to say anything about what that object means and why it was selected?
At first, looking through a huge amount of images, I decided to focus on what people knows about Puerto Ricans in Chicago, Humboldt Park, and how the park itself have been a place for anchoring the community in one place since it faced gentrification all the way from Lincoln Park and DuPaul, that was a major Puerto Rican hub, and then later West Town and Wicker Park, and then later Humboldt Park. So I've tried to find images of life in the park, and for me that image is so beautiful, so useful, so representative of that time. I'm not from Chicago, I come from the island, but I associate with my youth and with it. The same thing with the other two images that we included on the exhibit. So a lot of people doesn't know, and we have to understand that that's a really small slice of the Puerto Rican story. And it will take a lot more to go through the entire history. Puerto Ricans first establishing woodland all the way on the south side because it was closer to the steel mills. That's where the jobs were back in the 50s. In South Chicago, slowly they moved to the north due to many racial and political issues that were happening on Chicago. So what I'm hoping is that people is going to get interested on that story about Humboldt Park and slowly finding that the complete story behind that transition and movement on the city.
It's a very powerful object, I think. I think we're at the point now where we're going to be entertaining questions for any of the panelists or for me. That can't be avoided. So I think, Ellen, you're queuing up the questions. Have you done that?
Yes, Bernie, we've got a great question in here. Sara mentioned the impermanence and possible loss of control with YouTube. Do the panelists see a role for more specialized initiatives and platforms, such as Google Arts and Culture, if not for archiving and storage, then for public outreach purposes? If not, what are the concerns, except that it is Google?
Maybe we should start with Sara for that one.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not hugely familiar with Google Arts and Culture, but I would say that any concern that I would have would just be that it's Google, that Google's motivations are different than our motivations as you know, heritage institutions, that Google has, you know, Google tests products, Google drops products that don't succeed. You know, as Jeremy mentioned with the Milwaukee Sentinel papers that didn't get digitized and are not accessible. And so if, you know, Google could just discontinue that project at any time. And so I think it's important for all of us to create alternatives that have people, there's a motivation to keep them going, you know, that there's community support for it, there's institutional support. I mean, things like, you know, the Internet Archive are doing things very similar. That's a very, very large, you know, nonprofit archive that's collecting everything, you know, text, books, music, video, and making huge volumes of content available. And I have so much more confidence in their goals and their motivations. You know, I know that it is to just, you know, save access to our culture and to make it freely accessible to everyone. So I guess I just have more confidence. I guess I would look at who's doing it and what their reasons are, and that would sort of be the guiding force for me in which things to really focus on as cultural stewards.
When you're the questioner.
I've got another one.
Inquisitor.
What would mutually beneficial cooperation look like between the traditional general interest institutions like the Art Institute, Chicago History Museum, and the MCA, and smaller community-based or specialized organizations?
That might be for Jorge.
Do you repeat it again?
Certainly. What would mutually beneficial cooperation look like between a traditional institution and a smaller community-based organization?
To me, the main concern will be sitting together at the table and being able to define that collaboration that is not one-sided or top-down. It could be beneficial, of course. It could help bring awareness about a community collection. But at least in our institution, we're worry about that type of engagement. So far, we haven't had it in our archive. But if that comes, that's something that we need to address at community level with our advisory committee and seeing if this is really beneficial or not.
And equality in funding.
Yes.
Yes, I didn't want to say it, but yes.
And along with that too, I think really just that power dynamic, people, a willingness on the larger, more traditional institutions to give up a bit of power in the relationship. Obviously, any collaboration between a larger institution and a small local organization, the institution is seeing value in that small organization, and obviously they're coming to them for their expertise, for their knowledge, for their collections. And so obviously it can't be a one-way street. If there's if we're talking about something like a pop-up exhibit in a major institution, then they're going to need to be able to give up a little bit of the power and the control and cede a little bit of that to the smaller organization, because just because an organization doesn't necessarily have wealth or resources doesn't mean it doesn't have expertise. And most importantly, community knowledge. I think that's really because these smaller institutions really are the best way to tap into community knowledge and expertise. And those are the things that make those kind of collaborations successful.
Well, good points.
We've got another question. For all of you, what new skills would you advise aspiring curators, excuse me, I should know how to pronounce that, curators and collection professionals to obtain or develop?
Sara, oh, go ahead, Jeremy.
One thing I would say is really knowing how to use social media as a tool to not only connect with people, but to highlight the work that you're doing. That's a really important thing. Being able to just that kind of like professionalizing social media use, but then also really some of those more things that are focused on technology, how we present things. The only way I was able to get our oral histories in a usable format for display at the museum in YouTube was to look up how to write in little bits into the embed link into like the URL that you get from that, so that I didn't have an oral history talking about someone's experience living in Greece following the Nazi invasion. And then as soon as that video ends, you get, you know, a recommendation for the best bikinis of 2022 or something like that. So that was a really important thing. And it was something I was terrified of displaying these videos and having something like that. And so really just that attention to detail and kind of like I guess more out of the box thinking about what's really going to affect the items that you're trying to display online, because there are so many different issues and avenues that we've never really had to contend with before.
Yeah, I would say as many skills as allow you to sort of be able to control presentations online, you know, whether that's like CSS and knowing how to, you know, sort of directly code the content on websites instead of relying on like visual editors, anything like that that allows you to control presentations more. I think it will definitely be something that will help.
In our case, in terms of technology and media, that's something that I'm still getting a grip. Right now, we're starting to use Omeka, so that's a process that we are learning ourselves. So for us and our staff, we rely on education institutions like the Chicago Cultural Alliance and the Collection Consortium to acquire the necessary knowledge to maintain and to use those tools that are out there.
Yeah, I would also say just an active participation in the community of, you know, the archival community, like just being on the Association of Moving Image Archivists listserv and just seeing the discussions that go on about technology, going to the conferences, also the Chicago area archivist, being parts of those communities, you're going to understand, you know, like what we are all talking about, what we're all grappling with, and learn about everyone else's solutions. So you're not making up the solutions yourself.
I think we've got time for one more question, and it's kind of the flip of what we just asked was, so how important today are the traditional curatorial roles like appraisal, authentication, and documenting the provenance of documents and artifacts for collecting institutions?
Well, that will never change. I hope it doesn't change. Those are all vital to what we do, and especially when you're making something available online, you really need to make sure that you have all the right information. And if you obviously there are some times where you're not necessarily going to know every aspect of the provenance, but you just need to make that clear when you present something, and just have that honesty about what you're actually presenting. But the documenting of provenance, and the actually having the correct metadata attached to everything, and that's still essential and always will be.
Yeah, I mean, that's fundamentally what we do. I mean, we're here to collect items and have the expertise to save them and to have the information about them, to be the authoritative source of the people who researched it and really know what it is and can point you to related items and stuff like that. That's our most essential skill and function.
Yes, I agree. That's fundamental. That's key for the survival and continuity of an archive. We spend the first couple of years on defining those policies, those guidelines. If one day I'm not there on the office for some reason, somebody can continue the work with the documentation and can see the manual to continue the work, to have all the legal forms and attached to it. That's something that is not going to go away.
Maybe especially important in a time when there's so much misinformation and disinformation out there in the media and public on the web. Yeah.
Bernie, any last thoughts for our panel?
We could go on for another couple of hours, or I could go on for another couple of hours listening to Jorge and Sara and Jeremy speak. I thank the panel for sharing their thoughts and their perspectives with us. I think what we've heard tonight shows me that the Chicago Collections, 10 years into the Chicago Collection Consortium history, our Chicago Collections themselves are in very good hands.
They really are. I've been so impressed with this organization, and speaking personally, this is one of the most profound professional organizations I've been with in my career as a librarian. It just reaps so many rewards, and I thank you all tonight. And I'm closing tonight by thanking everyone for joining us, thanking our panelists, thanking our curator of our digital exhibit, and we invite you to join us for future events and programming, so celebrating our 10th anniversary. Thank you so much.